Hey guys, what's up? Today I want to show you what I think are the 10 most hated JRPGs of all time. Of course, I'll explain why a lot of people seem to hate these games with a passion, even though most of them are actually pretty good. Now for this video, I'll be compiling a top 5 that I did last year with another top 5 that it's pretty much brand new. So let's begin! First on the list is Final Fantasy VIII. When this game was first released over 21 years ago, I remember it was a huge deal. Everybody was playing it and everybody was loving it. Sure, back then some folks were already making a point against the battle system and the story, but 90% of the opinions were positive. Time went on, other titles in the series were released, and the hatred for this game truly began. Final Fantasy VIII has a big focus on the romance, and it's probably the most romantic of them all. This was handled in such a cheesy fashion that even I was complaining a little bit about it back then. Plus, half of the cast just wasn't that interesting in my opinion. I really enjoy this game and its story, perhaps because I'm a romantic myself. I guess most of its haters just couldn't cope with that. Now, the battle system was convoluted and messy. Abusing the summons led some gamers to believe they didn't have to bother with anything else, only to find out at the end that, yep, big mistake. Plus, the leveling up system was notoriously irrelevant. What was the point of grinding when the enemy was leveling up with you? Overall, Final Fantasy VIII is a great JRPG in my opinion, but I can clearly see why some people just love to hate it. Next on the list, Star Ocean 4, also known as Star Ocean: The Last Hope. Most of the hatred towards this excellent action RPG comes from two things. Whenever somebody strikes a conversation about it, there's always someone who immediately brings up the voice acting. I've always believed both the English and Japanese cast was top-notch here, but when it comes to characters like Limmel, we all agree it was painfully annoying. However, I think it wasn't game-breaking, as I still enjoy the entire adventure without hassle. Apparently, people just love to bitch about anything nowadays, and that alone was enough to make them quit playing it. I guess most of them didn't realize they can change the voice acting to Japanese at any given time. Now, while I've seen some complaints about the battle mechanics, it is mostly agreed that it's still great, possibly among the best in the series. Navigation, graphics, and gameplay were nice. The story and the main character progression, however, pissed off a lot of people. I've seen countless arguments against the cheesy and overly cliché aspects of it, but honestly, none of them convinced me. You know why? Because this story is just like almost every other JRPG in existence. Anyway, Star Ocean 4, I strongly disagree with the hatred towards it, but at least I understand it. Next is Kingdom Hearts 3. Never been a fan myself of the entire series, even though I actually enjoyed the second main title. Most of the hatred towards Kingdom Hearts 3 comes from the past, the background itself, how the many spin-offs, ports, re-releases and remasters led to a convoluted universe almost impossible to explain. Mr. Nomura handled the story very poorly with some entries, and apparently this third main one was no exception. It spawned a whole world of memes around it, with many reviewers and fellow YouTubers alike criticizing the lore. I gotta admit, I'm not interested in defending this game at all, but I can see why it would be very hard to make sense out of a crossover between so many stories and characters out there. Plus, I thought the gameplay was alright. Does this game really deserve the hate? I'm not sure because, like I said before, I've never been a fan of the series. However, I can easily see where most of its hatred is coming from. Here comes Tales of Cestiria. Oh man, this is a personal favorite for many Tales fans out there to absolutely despise. I've stood up in defense of this game many times before, but I gotta admit, it's hard not to yield. Not to say the haters are right, but they do have a point when it comes to a few things here. Leaving the Alicia controversy aside, a character advertised as the main heroine, only in the end that wasn't the case, I see nothing wrong with the story and characters. Sure, some of them are kind of unlikable and the overall plot is not that interesting, but come on, how many JRPGs are there being praised with far worse stories? The one thing, however, that I cannot protect this game from is the consensus against the battle mechanics. It is simply a big, fat, painful mess. It's technical alright, but somewhat clunky and hard to engage. I ended up playing the game on easy mode just so I wouldn't have to understand it properly. Also, I guess the small open world feature was irrelevant. No real reason was there for it to be in the game because it just didn't add anything substantial to the gameplay or the plot. Tales of Symphonia is a game I finished and enjoyed, but you know what? It's really hard to defend against its legitimate hatred. And for the first place here, I chose the Hyperdimension Neptunia series. It's impossible to pick a single game in this franchise, as it gets equal hate from all sides with every entry. Some people say today's JRPG market is garbage, mainly thanks to the incredible amount of lowly games, cutesy characters and cheesy stories. Every Neptunia title is a repetition of itself in terms of almost everything, so spamming the market with them is a clear abuse of the liberties Compile Hard takes. But hey, just like with all the previously discussed games here, they're popular. People just keep buying them, so the company keeps making them. Milking this overly idiotic franchise is what pisses off most of its haters. There's just too many of them and not a single one stands out for being great. I personally don't hate them, as I've enjoyed some other JRPGs with very similar characteristics. Nonetheless, I gotta admit I've never enjoyed a single one of them and I often try to stay away. My apologies, but I see no acceptable arguments from my behalf to advocate in favor of Hyperdimension Neptunia. This is a series people just love to hate for reasons that I believe are quite legit. In conclusion, they're all trash. Are they good or bad trash? Well, I guess that's for you to decide. Number 5. Fire Emblem Fates. Another game that's not really that hated, probably because a lot of gamers jumped in with this one into the series. It's the veterans that absolutely despise it for reasons that are very simple: story and characters. The premise was interesting, having your customized Corrin, the main hero or heroine, and having you decide which nation you will fight for. The idea was so appealing that the game ended up divided into 3 separate releases called Birthright, Conquest, and Revelation. Although the latter was digital and its only physical release was on the expensive and rare special edition of Fates, gameplay was fine too, carrying over elements from the commercially successful Awakening, also on the 3DS. That game had already started a small rift between fans, by the way, but it was Fates that created a continuous hatred that still stands today. Characters were extremely stereotyped, extremely generic, with conversations going beyond ridiculous, childish, proning only to generate more senseless fan service. The series was known for having simple but deep political stories, serious plots that revolved around war drama, and its relentless tragedy. Imagine the cheesiest version you can of those two terms, and you've got Fates as a result. I don't hate this game because I actually enjoyed my playthrough with all routes, but the characters and their dialogue prompt me to never play any of them ever again. I stood up before it a long time ago in another video, but I don't think I can do that anymore. Number 4. Lunar Dragonsong. This one buried the Lunar series 6 feet underground. Make that 12 cause it just feels like it keeps going down. This atrocity was released exclusively on the Nintendo DS, also called Lunar Genesis in Europe. It was a commercial fiasco, panned by critics worldwide, merely just for a couple of game-breaking mechanics it had. You had to walk everywhere, including towns, cause otherwise your characters will lose HP. Yeah, merely by running. During battle you couldn't choose which enemy to attack, so the game will do it for you. Developers Game Arts explained this was done so battles will be done faster. Bad decision. There was also a combat and virtue mode. In combat mode, you gained 0 experience but gained items instead. Virtue mode offered the exact opposite. Story and characters didn't even try to save it from absolute doom. They were just a mediocre attempt to resemble the simplicity of its classic predecessors. I can barely say anything positive from this sad attempt at continuing the Lunar series. It killed the franchise for good, and we still haven't heard anything besides a remake of the first game on the PSP back in 2009! Hate this game, I command you, it definitely deserves it! Number 3. The Highlight series. It's time to go back really far into the past. In 1984, one of the godfathers of action RPGs was created, Highlight. Released for several computer systems to a commercial and also influential success, it was also one of the first open world games ever made. It was a pretty simple game from a top-down view, focused on exploring, killing enemies and leveling up. The series' first biggest mistake was thanks to its NES localization. It didn't reach North America until 1989, years after action-adventure games and action RPGs were very well established. Nothing changed besides creating a horrible loop music that resembled the Indiana Jones theme. It was just outdated, mediocre, far from innovative, and really boring to play. A sequel was released only in Japan and no one cared for it. A third game came into existence for the MSX and the Famicom. We got its port on the Sega Genesis called Super Highlight in 1990. It wasn't terrible, with some mixed reviews. Gamers and critics praised the morality system which carried over from the previous game, but it was just too slow-paced, convoluted, hard, cryptic and once again quite boring. Last but oh boy, definitely not least, as if to put the final nail in the coffin, Virtual Highlight was released on the Sega Saturn. A full remake of the original game. I don't even have to explain why this is one of the worst RPGs of all time, just look at it. The first Highlight, I believe it unworthy of its hatred considering its huge influence on the genre, but it's a computer game, and every transition to home consoles was ruined, outdated and terribly designed. Number 2. Breath of Fire 6. If this game was popular and had it been released in the West, it would have been number 1 in this video, but thankfully it stayed in Japan. I feel really sorry for anyone who played this horror show over there cause it's abominable. It was Capcom's attempt to continue the series but in the mobile market. But it also came out for Microsoft Windows, and the stupidity doesn't end there. Honestly, it felt more like a bad indie game than a Capcom title. It was released on February of 2016. A year and a half later, its servers were shut down for obvious reasons. Capcom's biggest mistake, however, was to call it and treat it as a main Breath of Fire game. It was advertised as 6 instead of a spin-off or any other format. Yes, this RPG deserves all the hate it can get, but what's the point? It's not like Capcom cares about the series anymore. Number 1. The Final Fantasy XIII Trilogy. It's not hard to understand the huge amount of hatred these games receive. Most of it comes from fans of the creator of the series, Hironobu Sakaguchi. He left Square Enix right after the Final Fantasy X games were released, and even in those games you could already see his style was pretty much gone. So by the time Final Fantasy XII came about, 80% of it created pretty much by Yasumi Matsuno, director of Final Fantasy Tactics, the rift was already starting to show among fans. It didn't go full power though until this game was released, and to piss everybody else even more, the game sold millions of copies and will go on to have 2 direct sequels. So while a commercial success, the trilogy was a critical controversy with half of its players completely hating it. Besides not feeling like a Final Fantasy game at all anymore, multiple extra reasons were there. I mean, forget for a moment it's a mainline Final Fantasy. Imagine it is its own game with a different name. Even still, a lot of people will hate it just for its convoluted story, shitty characters, and weird gameplay mechanics. Apart from adding some quick-time events for no reason, the dungeon design and the battle mechanics were an obnoxious experiment. Sure, a lot of people still loved it and praise it today as a great trilogy, but the reality is that a lot of other people still despise it. Me, I don't really hate the trilogy, but I definitely do not like it. If you love or hate any of these RPGs or any other RPG out there, that's okay, but I think personally attacking somebody else for loving them or hating them, it's a bad idea. In my opinion, you should just let people love or hate whatever they want, and that shouldn't stop you from loving or hating whatever the hell you want. But anyway, that's only my personal opinion. Now, before you click away, a quick reminder that my books are available on Amazon, link in the description below. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time!